If you're a storyteller, say a novelist or a movie maker or a screenwriter, how do you tell your readers, your watchers, how do you tell your audience when something really important is happening? How do you give them a cue in advance to be paying attention because something really significant is going to happen, or at least something you want your audience to remember? One trick that writers use is something you probably learned about back in high school English class called foreshadowing, right? Where you'll give sort of a little nod in advance to something that's going to come up later. And maybe by seeing that detail early on, readers or watchers or viewers will pay attention when there's a payoff later on. There's a famous line about the playwright Anton Chekhov, who used to say, if you put a shotgun on the mantle in your play in the first act, it had better go off by the third act, right? This idea of like, if you're gonna give clues, then there needs to be a payoff. And sort of conversely, if you want people to pay attention to something, start dropping hints early on. For people who came of age around the turn of the millennium, about 25 years ago, maybe you remember this brilliant piece of marketing. When Star Wars Episode 1 was going to come out, this was the iconic poster telling people in advance this was going to be the story of where Darth Vader came from. And it was perfect. Without any words at all, you saw a kid, and we were supposed to figure out from the shadow that looked awfully big for a little kid, but that turns out to be the silhouette of Darth Vader himself. This is what we were going to be getting. Without any words spoken at all, you just got the very clear foreshadowing of this is going to be the story of how this little boy becomes this dark Sith Lord of the Galactic Empire. Even if he hated the movies, a lot of people loved that poster and that image. It was all foreshadowing. In a way, church folks do foreshadowing too. Every year as we lead up to the celebration of Christmas, some of our foreshadowing is not quite so subtle, like a giant Christmas tree all lit up with lights. There are more subtle forms of foreshadowing as well. The increasing light of the 4 candles of the Advent wreath gradually bringing the light up in the room. Well, I mention all this because the Bible itself, the Gospels themselves, are wrestling with the same question. How do the gospel writers get our attention and tell us something important is about to happen? How do they get us ready, not just to pay attention that something is going to happen, but to tell us why that something is so important? So we probably know the birth of Jesus is a big deal. Luke, the gospel writer, who's telling the story for the first time when he's writing it to his audience, how does he get them ready, both to say Jesus' birth itself is good news, and why is it good news? So he gives us sort of a foreshadowing moment. We're going to hear it this coming Sunday, as we get to hear the story of when Mary, the mother of Jesus, goes to visit her relative, maybe her cousin, some extended relative, Elizabeth. Both of them are in unexpected pregnancies. Elizabeth had been considered too old to have children, had never had them. Mary's too young and she's not married. And so there's this unexpectedness to both of their pregnancies. They've both been visited by angels telling them that their children are going to be really important to God's design to finally keep all the ancient promises and restore the hopes of God's people and save the whole world. And now to get our attention, as Mary comes to visit Elizabeth, there's a moment of beautiful, subtle foreshadowing. As Mary comes to visit Elizabeth, Elizabeth feels the baby kick in her womb, and she interprets this as this is foreshadowing. She goes, this is the baby who's well aware of just who's come to visit. And she says to Mary, I'm so happy because even the baby in my womb leaped for joy when we heard the news of your arrival and when you came. It's subtle foreshadowing that Mary's child and John, who is Elizabeth's child, are going to be really, really important, and that there's a connection between the two of them. So subtle foreshadowing. Oh, wow, the baby kicked in the womb. That's a fun family story that they would have told as the kids grew up, right? Oh, remember cousin John? Remember how when baby Jesus was still in Mary's womb, how you kicked even before you were born? That could have been just a family story. But then Luke sort of goes all out, and the foreshadowing goes from subtle to blatant. Because after this little encounter, after Mary and Elizabeth visit, they greet, they embrace, and then Mary breaks into what the church has preserved as a song. Mary breaks into words we sometimes call the Magnificat, from the Latin translation of the opening words. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. And she breaks into praise of God about what God is doing in her child. Baby isn't even born yet, right? Jesus hasn't been born. Mary is still carrying Jesus. He's still being formed in the womb. And Mary breaks into song to say, not just in that moment to Elizabeth, but to all of us who overhear this story, the coming of Jesus is good news. Why? Well, Mary sings, this is about God finally keeping all the promises to our ancestors. This is about God being faithful of the covenant made to Abraham and Sarah and to our ancestors. This is about God lifting up the lowly and deflating the overinflated egos of the arrogant and the proud. This is about God pulling tyrants down from their thrones and lifting up the lowly. This is about God filling the hungry with good things and sending the rich away empty. This is about God restoring things and turning the tables and making a whole new kind of creation where the last are put first and all things are made new. In other words, Mary's not just telling us something important is happening. She's telling us why we should pay attention. All of this is framed as sort of the intro, the foreshadowing to the birth of Jesus. When you're watching a movie or reading a book and you can see one of those moments where the author seems to be telling me to pay attention to something, you might not know why yet, but take what they give you, right? If they give you a clue, if they give you a nod, if they give you a shadow on a wall in a movie poster, hold on to it. It will be important later. On this Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Advent, the Sunday before Christmas, we're not just being told to pay attention to the child who's going to be laid in the manger. We're being told why his coming is good news. That Jesus' coming isn't just about a quaint, picturesque, sort of sentimental moment like in our nativity sets with everybody illuminated by candlelight with animals in the background. It's not just about a sentimental moment. It's about a God who saves and restores and lifts up those who've been stepped on, and a God who says that bullies don't get to have the last word. That's good news, so that we don't miss it. God, through Luke, the gospel writer, has given us some foreshadowing moments to tell us, pay attention, watch and listen. Here's why it's good news. God's turning the tables and doing a new thing. So before we get to Christmas, that's why we tell this story and hear these words this coming Sunday. Join us this Sunday on the fourth Sunday in Advent as we hear the good news that Mary sings in what we call the Magnificat, the story of why Jesus' coming is good news. See you Sunday.